Wow.
Yeah. Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Friday Australia at Home session. We're just going to give a couple of minutes to let everyone kind of filter into the room, but I hope you've all had a great week and don't have too much on this afternoon.
Why don't we all go around and say one really interesting thing about ourselves?
My name's Dan and I'm working from home.
My name is Jen and I'm drinking a beer and working from home.
Wow.
What is work?
What is hashtag work?
My name is Mark, and I'll just say the one interesting thing that I always say: I share a hairdresser with Ray Martin. So,
Oh,
but I think that's obvious. I mean, you just look at it.
Yeah.
Can I tell you something? I'm working with Ray at the moment, and I've been in his so his house is beautiful, clearly designed by his wife, and the one part that is allowed to be Ray Martin-esque is his office, which is an attic space in the roof. And to climb, you go off a corridor into his space, and it turns into Ray Martin. There's like pictures of war zones and stuff, and then as you get into his office, it's like a dusty bookshelf ridden place with clippings and like piles of papers everywhere and gold logies buried in the corner.
Thank you, Dan.
Logies are buried in the corner.
Yeah.
Like
That's
they're not in a
appalling.
mantelpiece or anything. They're just like dusty. They're like taped together with sticky tape.
I remember when I went to uni with his son, Luke, and we did arts review together.
Oh,
and
right, great.
Ray Martin did a promo video for us, which I don't know why, but he agreed to it, which is him just eating a piece of cake with two of his gold logies as a and all he says is, "And I'm Ray Martin," and then just takes a big mouthful of cake. And that's why he's the best.
we should do that. He's got 4 of them up. He's got 4 gold logies, and I think he's got 2.
He's got 5. He's got 5 in total.
5 in total, right? Okay, so I know there's 2 other silvers in that office. I think we should probably do at least one shot with that Home Alone with Ray, with like all 5, like all 7 of them, and kind of do a passing pass at like Tom Gleeson. I think that would be
And on that, I might cut in and just do our preliminary introductory stuff because this is exciting, but I don't want to like jump ahead for everyone who is doing this.
Oh, this is not all just about Ray Martin.
No, it's not all about Ray Martin.
Boo, I'm out.
Okay.
I do love the idea that, you know how people do, and I know I'm distracting even myself, but you know people do those rewatch podcasts where they go through and like do commentary on somebody's TV show? You should do that with Ray's career. Just rewatch all of the 80s, 60 minutes.
I'll happily rewatch all of the midday show.
And on that, I just want to say, I want to begin, although we kind of already have, by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I, at least, and I think many of the people who are joining us on the panel today are broadcasting from the Gadigal land of the Eora people, and I want to pay my respects to elders past and present. For those who haven't been to a session that I've hosted before, my name is Daniel Stone. I'm the Executive Director of Principleco, which is a progressive advocacy agency. So we work with a lot of organisations who are hoping to build a better Australia to help them be a bit more effective and impactful. And this is part of Australia at Home, which is a series that a coalition of different organisations came together to start, including The Guardian, the Centre for Australian Progress, Essential Media, the Community Council for Australia, Murray Blackburn, and Australian Climate Foundation, to basically create a space for everyone to come together while we're all trapped at home and think about things that are bigger or more complex or more longer term than perhaps we were when COVID was really bearing down on us and we were all feeling a bit anxious and nervous. Check out some of our events, both previous, we've got all the videos up at australiathome.com.au, and you can also see what we've got planned next week. Some quick administrative ground rules too. We're recording this session to share later so that people who didn't make it can see it. So if that's an issue for you, feel free to let either myself or Ashfa, who's on the chat, know. We're also going to keep everybody on mute just so there's not too much background noise. As you can see, we're going to have a chatty enough panel as it is, so we're going to try and keep that the background noise down. But do please use the chat and put your comments, thoughts, reflections, and especially your questions in there, because towards the end of the session, we're going to try and get as many people as we can to ask questions to the panel as well. So yeah, please throw your questions in there. Also, we really encourage you to keep your video on and to flick it to the grid view, which is just up in the top right-hand corner. One of the nice things about this is that you can just see all of the different people who are joining us, and you know, their reflections and their expressions as we're talking, which kind of helps us all feel a bit more connected. So to introduce today's session, knowing when to laugh or cry is not always particularly clear-cut, and we've all been feeling a lot of emotions over the last couple of weeks. And people have a real tendency to turn to comedy in times of crisis, looking for a bit of relief from the gloom. But what kind of humour are people embracing? Are people going for things that take them to a whole different world, or are they looking for commentary on the world that they're seeing in front of them? And what do those preferences say about us? Is it too soon to joke about COVID, or if so, when might that change? There's lots of questions about the role that comedy might play in our new, strange, different way of living. So joining us to explore this today, we have a great panel of experienced broadcasters and comedians. I'm going to introduce them one by one, and I'm going to ask also each of you a question we've asked all of our panelists, which is a little bit earnest, but how are you going? So Mark, I'll start with you. So Mark Humphries is the satirist for ABC's 7:30 and formerly of The Feed and Pointless and a number of other programs you've possibly seen. Mark, how have you been feeling over the last couple of months? What's it been like working from home?
I think it's garbage. I don't care for the coronavirus one bit. Not a fan.
That's
yeah, no, it's
very, very.
yeah. I'm taking a
Brave
hard
take.
stance
Brave.
pretty early on. Yeah. I'll see if anyone comes with me. But I made the mistake of trying to move house during this crisis. So that took an already stressful period and then added an extra layer of stress on top. And due to what's happened, I currently have my in-laws living with us. From thank you from Russia, and also my brother-in-law from Russia, and our 2 children under 3. So there's 7 of us in this together, and I sort of feel like I'm like billeted to a Russian family, like I'm an exchange student who's just sort of smiling a lot. And
I think Dostoevsky wrote this play, right? Wrote this novel.
Right.
Yeah.
This is the thing. Well, people sound like, oh, that sounds like a really, funny premise. It's like, yeah, but I'm not laughing. So that's kind of what the situation that I'm dealing with, and so I try and get out as much as I can. But I really miss the big thing I'm missing, and which is nice now that it's loosening up a little bit. But I really miss the sitting down at a cafe, and maybe doing some work or meeting up with people. It's the eating food at the place where the food was prepared. That's the thing that's really bothered me. I felt like I had to kind of keep moving all the time. Yeah. You got to grab the food and then take it off somewhere else. And I just want to sit down. That's all I want.
Yep, that makes sense. Are they watching reruns of the weird Everybody Loves Raymond Russian addiction?
I love that you've referenced that. Yeah, there's a great documentary, if you haven't seen it, called Exporting Raymond, where Phil Rosenthal, the co-creator of Everybody, Dan and Jen, have you seen that?
Yeah.
I haven't seen the documentary. I've seen the Somebody Feed Phil one that we're He's a funny man.
He's very likable, and he anyway. So they make a Russian version of Everybody Loves Raymond, and basically kind of sabotage it, and completely misunderstand where the humor is supposed to come from and everything like that. So so I'm living in that hell.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's not hell. They're wonderful people. Sorry, they're lovely people. This isn't being filmed, is it?
No, they'll never see this. No. So, Jen Fricker, you're a stand-up comedian, writer, actor, radio presenter, all-round talent. How have you been feeling in this time? How's it been for you?
It's weird, so this whole coronavirus period was meant to be comedy festival time. So this week I would have been at New Zealand Comedy Festival, and I managed to squeeze in 1 week at Brisbane Comedy Festival, and then basically I had to cancel 45 dates across Australia and New Zealand.
Wow.
That didn't feel great. But in terms of day-to-day, I feel like this is quite similar to how life is on tour as a stand-up, which is just being alone, getting up, eating, drinking too much, and dicking around on the internet. So yeah, like it's not that different, except that there's no shows. So I don't know. It's every day is different, and I guess I'm learning a lot about how to make comedy that isn't in front of a live audience, and I really miss that. Like that's the main thing I miss is the risk of live performance, and I miss like the energy of people. I don't feel comfortable making video content, like I'm trying to, but there's something that feels kind of airless about me, about it rather, for me. So yeah, it's been interesting. I feel like I have to completely like redefine myself, but then also things are relaxing, so you're trying to book gigs in November, but who knows how many people can actually show up. And yeah, I want to do drive-in comedy. I feel like that's the answer.
Yeah,
I've actually just got to go get my Uber Eats. It's so weird. Sorry, I'll be right back.
It's all the remarketing. Those ads really got into Dan's mind.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's not a bit. Sorry, Dan's really gone. Okay.
Yeah, I thought he was doing a bit. Oh, well.
All right.
I might just keep rolling with you, Jen. I was going to ask some questions of Dan, but with you. So it's actually kind of related to that. Like, what have you seen as the kind of impact on the comedy space and the broader art scene? Like, obviously, you've had to cancel dates, but like, what have you heard from other people? What does that look like?
Yeah, well, I think it's a social thing. That's what I didn't realize, that the job is so social. Like every night you're going and you're seeing, you know, mates who are comics and people in the audience and stuff like that, and traveling and things like that. And when the Melbourne Comedy Festival was cancelled, that hit me really hard, because that's kind of like comedy Christmas. That's when everyone you know is all in one place and you're really excited. You spend all year like working on your show. You spend all year checking in with your mates about their shows, and to have that just like not exist, to just be like blipped out of existence and not see those people that are part of your ecosystem essentially is really hard. We ended up doing like a Zoom closing night party like for the Melbourne Comedy Festival, where we just basically got on and gave each other awards and roasted each other and did a bunch of industry goss stuff. But and that was really good. But it is just like the loneliness. It's a really lonely profession anyway, because you're working for yourself, and you're traveling around and being alone a lot of the time. But then to take away those tent poles, I guess, is it's brutal. But yeah, I mean, I've been talking to other people, other comics who about making that conversion to like video content or written content, and I think we're all just commitment phobes, because in live performance things can change in a million different ways between one performance and the next. And I remember, I think Reese Nicholson was saying this. It's like you film something and then it lives and you can't change it. And that is so confronting for comedians, for stand-ups at least, that you can't like, you know, tweak a word or a beat or anything like that. Yeah.
And what do you think about like the economic stuff? Do you think like you worry?
Oh, we're fucked. We're fucked.
would anything make it less fucked? Like,
yeah, sure. I mean, it's an already low paying, low support industry, especially stand up. And yeah, I mean, there are question marks about whether any of these major festivals can exist next year, because, you know, half of them have had to spend most of their funding just like bailing out comedians. And I'm lucky because I'm kind of at a point where, you know, while it has been a financial loss, it's not the entirety of my income. But I know a lot of people who quit their day jobs to go do the festival season. I know a lot of people who like put that outlay on their venues and their staffing, and it's gone. Like the team that I work with, would try, basically half of them have been put on like annual leave and that kind of thing. And like the director I work with, I'm trying to figure out ways to make sure he gets paid for the full run, because we've been working on this show for 2 years. So that's, and then now it's like, is that show even relevant? Like, is anyone gonna want to see that this time next year? Like, do I even want to do that next year? You know, like it's so weird because the lead times are so long. And then things like this which is the risk of live performance as well, that it can just turn on a dime, but we're fucked.
Yeah.
It reminds me of there was the story of Vaughn Meader. He was an impressionist who during the Kennedy administration, and he was renowned for being the best JFK impersonator. And he released this album. It was called The First Family, and it was this huge hit. And then Kennedy was assassinated, and his life was destroyed. His career never. Sorry, I'm not saying it will. I'm not saying we'll never recover from this, but I'm just saying, but on Jen's point that things can change.
Yeah,
that's just such a big example that I can think of where.
My Melbourne Comedy Festival show was me doing Alan Jones for 90 minutes. Extremely painful. Now
I feel like that will live on. There's still an appetite for that.
Yeah, what are we all doing with our Alan Jones bits? Are we going to keep pushing them for the next 6 months, or are they done? Are they out?
I have the fortune of having a platform where I can put at least something out. So hopefully next week there will be some Alan Jones on At Home Alone.
And I guess talking about that, Dan, now that you're back with us and hopefully satisfied, what is it you've been making us? Was it not Australia at Home, or is it? I'm getting confused with the name of this show.
You're making this show, Dan. You're making this show.
I'm making this show. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It's called At Home Alone Together. It's a satirical comedy show about the coronavirus, essentially. We are making primarily fun of lifestyle as a genre of television, and then trying to figure out ways that we can use that genre to make jokes about how we are forced to change the way we live.
And how the hell did you produce a television show when everyone's been in isolation? That's an incredible feat.
This is what our production meetings look like. We are all making the show out of our bedrooms, and we are all trying to... The biggest hurdle we have is getting data transferred across. So if only there was some kind of national network of broadband that could allow us to move large data files across quickly, it would be a lot easier. But in honesty, this has been one of the most pleasurable production experiences of my career, in that we are finding great comedians who can create and package their own material, and giving them license to go wild within the boundaries of the lifestyle program. So it's quite a thrill, and it's really fun to kind of also give contributors work as well. We've got people pitching us, and we're commissioning scripts, and we're trying to figure out ways that we can get people all around the country who, like Jen, who have had their entire year of live performance knocked out, at least something to keep them going. So we're trying to spread that as thin as possible, and trying to give and 2 spots per comedian as they come in, and trying to facilitate that is the big challenge. So it's really fun. So far we've given 40 contributors bits of money to either write scripts or shoot scripts or edit stuff, which has been great. So it's really quite a thrill to kind of be in this position. Screen Australia and the ABC got their act together pretty quick smart as soon as the festivals were wiped out, and said, well, let's find a way that we can give comedians work. And this is just one platform that they've worked on, and it got commissioned in probably record time. I got a phone call on Thursday. By the Friday, it was like, well, you got to sign your contract. I'm like, okay, great. And Monday we're working. So it's pretty remarkable that that's the situation. That I feel very privileged to have this job, kind of facilitating this show, because it's it's my community, and I love my community, and want to see them thrive, and I want to see new voices thrive too. So it's really cool to have people who haven't been on telly either in a long time, or haven't had a lot of TV experience, or have none TV experience, get to publish their own work on telly. So that's, for me, I love that stuff. That's new voices, and plenty of new voices is what excites me.
And are people at home filming it themselves? How have you managed the production side of it?
Some of them, it depends. We will often send out a camera person who is a shooter, producer, a director, sound person, all in one. So we, particularly in the early days, we didn't want to spread anything, and so everyone kind of goes out with masks and gloves and sending a one-person crew out to the comedian, who uses their housemates primarily as the other actors with inside a sketch, and we shoot there. So that's the mode. With Ray, it's a little different because we want to make him look really good. So we have a lighting guy, and I go out as well to kind of manage manage Ray and make sure he's feeling comfortable with what he wants to, with what we're asking him to do, which is primarily destroy his legacy every week.
And Mark, I think talking about making things in the context of all of this, you've continued doing your work as well. Has that been challenging, or because you're a much smaller team, it's really just you and your writing partner? Is that still been really straightforward and pretty similar to how it always has been?
So from a production standpoint, it hasn't radically changed. So Evan Williams is my brilliant co-writer, who we have been working together for years, and so we're still doing that. And Chloe Angelo, our shooter, who's now also working with Dan on At Home Alone together. So that sort of core team is still there. The challenge that we've faced is because we're on 7:30, as opposed to being on a comedy program, there's already a barrier that exists slightly where you're asking the audience to take a bit of a leap into our kind of satirical world after they've just come out of this news and current affairs program. And what we found challenging early on was that 7:30 has become essentially an emergency broadcast service in many ways, with people like Norman Swan and the kind of people were tuning into 7:30 to get really reliable information, and as I say, using it sort of as an emergency broadcast system. And so then me in an Akubra suddenly doesn't feel such like an essential doing Barabbas loins. It doesn't kind of have the same weight to it as here's how you don't die. So it was that kind of thing of well, how does this work? And what was nice was that 7:30 were very much sort of we think people want escapism, and so that they never there was never a discussion about maybe we just ease off on this for a moment. Early on, the issue was just at what point do we start referencing this sort of stuff? Because I remember there was a sketch that we wanted to do early on in sort of the situation, and they were just, and I think that night they had people on the show whose relatives had died of related to COVID, and it's just that sort of thing of, and not that our sketch was mocking that for a moment, but just even being in that space. So we ended up just shitting on Scott Cam, which is just reliable, but it was something where so we did that, but it's this is the new reality, and so it then became clear we can't really skirt around it. You have to deal with it. So that's sort of the initial conversation we've had, and I must say, going into each sketch, I am finding it a lot more difficult than in the past, because traditionally we would just focus largely on the political side of things, and I'm not sure to what extent the appetite is there for us to go completely, hammering the government the way that there normally would be. So we've done a little bit. We did a sketch a couple of weeks ago. Sorry, I know this is a long answer. A sketch a couple of weeks ago where it was sending up the government's response to the arts and entertainment industry. And that was something where we could go a bit harder. But early on, I think there was a little bit of a kind of a sentiment of I hate to use the phrase "we're all in this together," but sort of we kind of need the country to succeed. We all do need to kind of be, on the same side here. And how useful is it at this point to absolutely, shit on Scott Morrison and all of that? There'll be plenty of time for it. But it just early on, it was it seemed kind of petty. I think that's sort of true of culture war stuff generally. You kind of have to pick your battles, and especially when you compare how our country is sort of navigating this versus how disastrous it's been in some other countries. That's another thing we sort of taking into consideration. Just how hard do you hammer them? I think you can do it, but you got to choose the right targets and just not be kind of blanket, pessimist.
I guess a question to you, Monk, but also I guess to both Jen and Dan as well. Like when you're trying to make that call, like what are you looking for? Like what's the kind of test to determine when the moment's right or the topic is right?
That's a really great question. It's a gut feeling. It's based on, I think Twitter is certainly a big influence for me of gauging just where. I was going to say where the conversation is, where our conversation is. I don't want to say that Twitter is, an accurate representation of society, but it's a pretty good indicator of what's on people's minds and a kind of general sentiment thing. I think what was interesting, just as an example that I noticed, was that Tim Minchin and Briggs did a song sending up the government's response to the fires and the coronavirus thing. And now there was a mixed response, and I think what was interesting about that was that there were people who absolutely loved it, but then there were people who were like, "Not now. We just don't need this. This element of criticism is not the most useful thing at this point." Now, that's open to people to interpret whether or not that's the correct response, but I just thought that was an interesting indicator that there was a bit of pushback against shitting on the government too early in the response. I think the fire thing, certainly, there was plenty of anger towards how the government dealt with that. But the sentiment around the coronavirus was less clear. And so that was an interesting indicator where I was like, okay, I'm not sure at this point how hard you can go on the government and still keep people on side. I think now, as the gaps in the government's response have become more visible, you can then start focusing on things and pulling those out. But early on, I felt a little anxious about going, really hard on them.
What about you, Jen?
I mean, for me, I think about like who my audience is before I make anything. And I'm kind of with Mark, like you find where that discussion is. For me, I'm not on Twitter so much as like Instagram, and like I'm like one of those 30-year-olds on TikTok, which I'm not posting dance videos, but like, I think that like TikTok is one of the best in terms of content about coronavirus and satire. These like 16-year-olds on TikTok are making insane things. And I think it's just, for me, my whole thing is like, you don't want to punch down, obviously, in comedy. It's such like a self-evident thing. For me, the funniest part of coronavirus is that it's absurd. Like it is the fact that we are all locked inside our houses against this invisible enemy. Like, I don't know. I think the absurdity of that kind of crushing nihilism that no one really knows when it's going to happen or when it's going to end or when it's going to get better. I think that is brewing some incredible comedy that's not necessarily rooted in politics as such, but kind of just about how we're living our lives. And I don't know if I'm rambling or not, but yeah, I guess for me, it's like I'm not so much chasing after specific people or anything like that, but more trying to respond in a human way. Like I feel like the best content and like the content that I'm loving from Dan's show is like stuff that really speaks to how we're authentically living in this time and how we are all losing our minds in our houses and having to, and the added audience of social media, like how we have to perform for social media like we're not losing our minds, but we all know we're losing our minds. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's all just about kind of, for me, I just want to make things that make people happy. And, but also, I've lived long enough to have the ire of the Triple J text line and the internet, so I don't really care if people don't like it either. I'm dead on the inside, I guess.
Not at all, Jen. Siobhan Reed messaged in the chat. Good ramble.
Yeah,
that was
good. Thank you.
But Dan, how do you make a call as to like what's okay and what isn't? How do you determine that?
Look, I know it's really tricky because we're in a strange time. Even our opening titles kind of has the virus up for a split second. And it's kind of one of those things where we had a conversation where it's like, oh, is that okay? Because some people may have lost people because of the virus. Is it okay to put this up? But that picture, that iconic image of the virus, is really a nod to the times we're living in as well. So we kind of went with it anyway. And as long as we're not, as Jen mentioned, punching down or harming people intentionally, and I think kind of that's where we go with our comedy, and trying to figure out like the absurdity, which is pretty much what Jen said, is of how we're trying to live our lives right now is so strange for everyone. And so we're just trying to make fun of that. And I have the added benefit of our show is not being innately political. So unlike Mark, we don't have to attack the government, or there's not a mandate there to really criticize the government all the time. Unlike my previous show, Tonightly, which we did relentlessly, and henceforth we're not on air anymore. That's interesting, isn't it?
That's so weird.
But there is plenty, but there's still, in my mind, there is plenty of things.
I think that's Sarah Henderson's problem with your current program. Not enough bashing the government.
Sarah Henderson didn't really like our pointed jokes about sourdough. Really Can I shouldn't talk about this because it'll get written up in some blog or something.
Do it.
Hello, Peter Ford, if you're watching.
Who is Peter Ford? I don't know who he is. Anyway, that's an in-joke from him. So the one of the biggest things that are happening right now in Australian governance rest outside the government, which is the most incredible thing. Like this COVID-19 commission is the most awful fucking thing, where you've got the coal lobby and the gas lobby actively fighting each other as to how much government subsidy they should both be given in order to move the country forward. And it's run by vested interests in these fossil fuel groups. And I had the privilege of having Ben Rhodes on our podcast, A Rational Fear, a few weeks ago, where we spoke about this. And I said, Ben Rhodes is the former national security advisor for Barack Obama and did a lot of the foreign policy work for Barack Obama. And I said, Ben, at this time, our government isn't in session at the moment in Parliament until August 1st. And they've put in this coronavirus commission, which is, if you look at their resumes, they're largely vested interests in fossil fuels. And he laughed for about 30 seconds. He said, well, you know what? You can tell a lot about your country when they're in a crisis and who they put in charge. He said, in America, when we had the global financial crisis, we just put in charge the banks. And that was it. And that's who runs our country. And we know who runs yours. And I thought, well, that is so evident. And that is the thing that makes me angry. When I'm looking for something to make fun of satirically, I always look for things that make me feel angry, or a bit of hypocrisy, or something that, as Mark said, a gut feeling. And that gut feeling is the inner burning of justice that you want to try and, rectify with a joke. And we all know satire fixes everything.
Yeah. on the link there of talking about the US and through Ben Rhodes, we have a question from Andrew Hayes. Andrew, you there?
Andrew,
I feel like it looks like you're visible. Maybe we've lost.
Hi there.
Oh, Andrew, you got a question?
Oh, hey.
Yeah, hi guys. So I was just wondering if it's a little bit sensitive to criticise the Australian government. Why don't you just talk about Trump? I mean, the material rights itself, surely.
But that's why we don't do it.
That's the problem. That's the exact problem. Yeah.
Trump is too funny, and you can't write about Trump. So we always have to look at Trump-adjacent topics. There's any comedian who's doing anything about Trump finds... I covered the 2016 election for Fusion in America. I was their EP of satire there, and I found it so difficult to go hard on Trump all the time, because Trump is just ridiculously funny. Today he fucking said he tested positive to a COVID-19 test, but positive actually means good, which actually means he tested negative, but it's very positive. Like you can't write anything funnier than that.
Yeah.
There's no fucking point.
Yeah.
I'm very angry, Andrew.
And also with Trump stuff, like, who are we talking to when we make fun of Trump? We're not talking to people who support him, because they're not going to listen to us. And people who don't like Trump already agree that he's batshit crazy. So it kind of just feels like you hit a point where the joke has been made, or there is you kind of go like, what is the new angle on this? That this person is ludicrous. And yeah, I don't know. I just don't. I always just feel like it's a kind of a cheap joke to make now. Like when people call him like Cheeto face or whatever, you're just like, yeah.
Oh, well, that'll fix it.
Yeah. Oh, got him. That'll help those kids locked down.
There is things comedians in that area should be looking at, and that is the misappropriation of funds, the way that the COVID response is completely terrible over there, the fighting in between states, the drastic inequality, the healthcare system is just ridiculous over there, and Stephen Miller is driving a lot of the policy. And so when comedians are thinking about stuff over there, the best stuff is pointed in a more specific direction, not just to Trump. So the Trump stuff is very kind of broadcast, nightly, commercial television, but the smarter comedians like the Jenna Friedmans of this world, the Zara Nurgbashks, the people of this world who are making great stuff aren't the people who are on a mainstream kind of channels. So kind of look out for smaller comedians who've got their niche and really attack issues specifically.
On the politicsy side of things, one kind of last question from me, which I acknowledge is a bit of an indulgence, but a lot of my work is involved in the act of kind of persuasion and dealing with misinformation, particularly over the last couple of years. And so I think satire is at its best when it's like a step or two further exaggerated beyond the truth, which I guess we were kind of just speaking about. And it's always historically been a really powerful way of challenging the powerful without necessarily getting your head bitten off in doing it. And I think like it comes to mind, like there was that great period of The Daily Show with Jon Stewart when he trolled CNN's Crossfire and pointed out how partisan and dumb it was. And he, when they were challenging him, well, you make jokes, you're not, blah blah blah, his response was like, oh, I'm a comedian, like I'm not held to those same standards that journalists are. And it's a compelling argument. But now I think we're seeing huge amounts of really polarizing, really fringe figures who are actually extremely destructive and intentional with their politics use. Oh, it's a joke, as this kind of, like defense, this kind of like shield that rejects any kind of criticism. And I think or rejects any kind of accountability for their comments. And I think it's really disappointing because it starts to muddy the water between what is meaningful civic comment that you can be held to and what is a joke. And so I guess my question there is, in the context of that, do you think that comedy still does or should get a kind of free pass when it comes to that? Or how do we start to draw a line between what is actually a really hurtful or sarcastic active misrepresentation, so not actually the Onion or Batuta Advocate, like some subtle misrepresentation of a truth we all know, but actually is a deliberately misleading thing designed to trigger an emotional and political response? How do we draw the line between those two things? And like, I guess, yeah, like, do you have any sense about how to manage this challenge?
That's such a big question.
I know. I acknowledge it's a big one, but it's something that I've been thinking about a lot, and I was just curious to know your thoughts, if you had any.
Well, if your point of view is correct, then means to an end, I say. Well, I think for all of us, Jen, Mark and I, we wouldn't try to necessarily do things. Exaggeration is fine, I think, for us. I don't think we would go out of our way to make the incorrect fact or the incorrect point. I think we would probably have our ducks in a row in terms of making sure the point we're making is solid and is based on truth, because all comedy is based on truth. And it doesn't.
Every joke should be defensible in a Senate estimates inquiry.
Yeah, for our bosses.
That's the guy who works at the
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, but for us, there's a real risk for us in terms of defaming people as well. So we need to be absolutely correct. And now you can also, the defamation is a whole other thing. You could be correct and it can also defame someone at the same time. But the thing is that I think for us, certainly for Rational Fear, the kind of stuff that I like to make, I want people to enjoy the irrational fear work in the knowledge that I've done some research, or whoever I've commissioned to do some research has done some research to back it up. You know, Jen's done some irrational fear in the past. Mark's been on irrational fear in the past. So it's, you know, we try and surround ourselves with good people who are honest brokers. Anyway, that's my personal thing.
This is something that I've really been struggling with actually through this whole thing. I think the internet has completely displaced, I feel, and like, I don't want to be offensive to anyone here, but I feel like the internet has displaced the power of satire a bit, where we can do all the research and base it in truth and a sense of justice and a knowledge of right and wrong and a knowledge of the the right side of history, essentially. But again, we're only speaking to people who already agree with us. I've been doing like a bit of research into like memetics and memes and things like that for this other project I'm working on. And the internet and the way people consume and use the internet enforces their previously held beliefs. Like that is something that is known now, that the algorithm that we are using every day serves us things that we already believe in or we are likely to believe in. So I think it is really hard to have a sense of like urgency in a way. I've been really struggling with like a feeling of apathy, because I'm like, well, if I'm just talking to people who agree with me, what's the point? Like, there's no risk in that. There's no risk in entering a room and everyone just telling you, tremendous, you've done a wonderful job. That's kind of also why I like doing stand-up, because you are confronted with a lot of people who don't necessarily like you or agree with you, or, you know, and especially as like a woman and a person of color, like it's a really politicized place to walk into, because you're not just talking to your mates. You're not talking to people who came there just to see you, especially if you're on like a big lineup. You're coming to talk to people who are on a Bucks night and don't care, you know? So then the joke is, well, how do I speak to a greater truth beyond politics, but then also reinforce a sense of, humanity and also my own point of view and that kind of thing. It's something I'm really grappling with. I don't know how to do it just yet, but I just know like when I'm writing for my tiny little world, you know?
That's really interesting. And something that I keep coming up against just more broadly is, again, in sort of within the Twitter space, I've lost faith in my own ability to convince people of a different opinion or bring them over to. And I think if someone is middle of the road or centrist or kind of non-committal on things, that's one thing. But when you if you go down, you know, for arguments, for example, you know, hashtag Obamagate, if you go down that rabbit hole and you start seeing where the conversation is at, there's this massive pool of people that appear irredeemable. And what I mean by that is I can't see a way of engaging with those people, because I don't think we're operating in the same reality. And that's what
the description you're looking for is a basket of deplorables.
But I don't want, when I say irredeemable, I don't mean, I'm not making a value judgment on them, although that happens to be the case. What I'm just saying instead is that they are so far into their own space, in the way that arguably we are as well, that there doesn't seem to be a bridge that can connect us. I don't know how you bring those people who are down in the QAnon and the Pizzagate and all that sort of, you know, once we start getting into conspiracy, and this applies to so many things, whether it's 5G or, you know, some of the Pete Evans stuff and all that kind of stuff. I don't know how those numbers seem to be getting bigger and bigger. And I've lost faith in my ability to have because I've had arguments on Twitter over the years, and I've stopped doing it now because it's never gone well.
You never walk away and you're like, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. We had a great chat, and you know what? I saw it from his perspective and he saw it from mine, and now we can move forward. It actually just devolves into, and I try to act in best faith. I try and go into it and say, I'm going to, you know, give you the benefit of the doubt here, but I'm putting forward this idea. And it's funny how quickly especially with those types of people, it devolves into name calling and abuse and or changing the topic. And so there's a whole kind of language around debate and conversation which has dissolved. And so that's, I think, a big problem we have in terms. So that's going off, what Jen was saying. Yeah, we're not going to, we're kind of operating within our audience, and we're not going to be able to necessarily break through to those other people.
Something happened to me during this whole thing, which is that, I think I live in my little like inner city bubble, and, from the marge, and I worked at the ABC, we all know what kind of person I am. But
is that a latte? Is that a latte?
I just had a pet gnat. Anyway, so I also, my mother is Māori, and it's been a lot of posts on social media from that side of the family, really voicing this, those conspiracy theories, the 5G, the fact that like Bill Gates invented this virus or whatever. And it's hard because these people are my family and I love them, but my first instinct as a comedian is to be like, well, you fucking idiots. Like, of course it's not real. But you try and engage these people in conversation, and of course they're just going to be like, you're brainwashed, blah, blah, blah. And then I started unpacking it a bit more, and I was like, well, why? And especially like my Māori family, like, why is it easier for them to believe that everyone's a lizard or whatever than it is to take the word of government or the word of the WHO or existing systems? And I think we have to think about, like for me, I was like, well, because in living memory, members of my family were taken from their family by the government, and 30 years later, this government is telling us to stay inside. There's like an instinctive distrust there, and there's I just never really thought about it, but it's like information has a lens that is colonized as well. And I think because we all exist in this bubble together, we don't often step that far out of it. But yeah, I don't know. I was just like, oh, and that's kind of where I'm coming from with this whole like hippy dippy idea of like compassion and like speaking to like a humane truth rather than a political one. Is that, I guess it's like I love these people and I can see them making choices that are really harmful, but I can see why, because they have been harmed by the same people telling us to make healthy choices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting.
I don't know. Just something put out there.
It really makes sense. I was talking to Bjorn Stewart, who is on our show, and he was saying that his uncle who's an Aboriginal actor. His uncle is in a MAGA Aboriginal Facebook group, and it's all these Aboriginal people who love Donald Trump. And it's so interesting. It's like, it's hard for me to work out how that even works, but I feel like it's something. I do feel like that Donald Trump represents something for people who are disenfranchised. That he isn't the government. I think you're bang on there, Jen. I never really thought about it like that.
I remember this quote I read about people who voted, especially poor white Americans who voted for Donald Trump, and people in general who vote against their own interests and vote for Donald Trump. And it was that Americans don't see themselves as poor or marginalized. They see themselves as embarrassed millionaires, that they will be Donald Trump. It's just, This is the way it is right now. And the way you get through that is by being bombastic and fighting against a system that traditionally has marginalized people.
Yeah. I wanted to make clear that I'm an embarrassed billionaire. So,
Dan, as someone who has done quite a lot of like advocacy work as well, I wonder if you have a take on that. How to navigate that line, or how to maybe even push back against people who say, "Oh, it's a joke," or "It's all a joke," without there actually being a punchline, just cruel, heightened sarcasm.
Here's the thing. I think truth is always the best thing we can aim for. And I feel like we as creators need to be truthful as often as we possibly can. And if you don't have truth, it doesn't seem to be much of a point of being a good person. So why would you even bother with that truth on your side? So the first thing I would try and endeavor to do is just combat mistruths with truths, and that's the best thing you can hope for at that point. I used to believe a long time ago when I used to make get up ads back in 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Last week, yeah.
13, geez, it's a long time ago. It's more, how funny that Get Up's been around more than 15 years. I used to think that I was really changing the world, and sometimes those campaigns really did, like particularly in 05 to 08, where Dan, you and I used to be involved with that stuff quite heavily, where large groups of people could galvanize around an idea and change something. And that's become less effective over time, particularly with this coalition government who become so ideological. But I also think that, and so then when I moved to the States and worked for Al Jazeera and Fusion, my idea about satire being able to change anything kind of took a battering. I really believed in it for ages. But now I'm back in Australia. I've almost back on the small amount of change is good kind of bandwagon. So I'm a big believer that even though content won't necessarily lead to change, you might be able to open up a conversation and change someone's mind, even if that's 1 or 2 people with a joke. You could put them on the back foot, make them laugh, and then maybe change their perspective on something. And that's what I hope to do with the work that I create. I want to try and galvanize a small audience, and maybe together we can go change something in a very small, fundamental, in a very small way. And I think lots of little change can eventually make big change. And if it's a long game for me now, I used to think I'll just do this campaign on this thing and we'll change it. It'll be great. But now I could see we are battling forces that are so entrenched and so invested, particularly around climate change, that we need to be thinking about this holistically. We need we need a coalition of lots of different people to kind of get on board to try and fight the way that we change how this government thinks about stewardship. And if we can do that through comedy, if I can do that using the tools that I have through comedy and the connections that I have through my comedy vehicles, then that's the only thing I can do. And when I'm willing to do that, I'm willing to put my shoulder to the wheel to create small amounts of change as a comedian.
This is a side thing of another challenge that I think we're facing, I think, in terms of making comedy about people in power, but also just a problem we're facing more broadly, is I think the concept of accountability has been weakened in the last few years, especially, where governments now sort of seem to, things that in times gone by would have been enough to get a minister removed. I think the Angus Taylor thing is an example where in previous, I feel like there's always, I might be wrong about this. I'm sure people will comment in the side, but I feel like that in previous governments of both colours, that sort of thing where a forged document would appear, that would be enough for someone to lose their position, or and I feel like, and you see it in the States, that no matter how many scandals appear, if you don't have people in charge who are operating with a good, shall we say, conscience, and are operating with some kind of concept of shame, accountability doesn't exist. And we can make all the jokes in the world, and journalists can hammer as hard as they want. But if at the end of the day, the people in power don't care enough to say, you know what, you're right, that's wrong, we need to address that, I think we're always going to be hamstrung by that until such time as there's an election, and then, people can make up their own minds, and that's when change can occur. But I don't know if anyone else feels that, but I'm finding increasingly, I feel like people are less accountable, and I think there's an expectation from a lot of the public that the media need to be doing more. I'm not convinced that that's necessarily the case. I think that there are people in power who are choosing to ignore these sort of disgraces and letting them fly.
We've got 5 minutes to go, so I might just pose one more question that came out of the chat earlier in the session, and I thought was a really interesting question. So, Jane, you mentioned you've been thinking a lot about memes. Do you guys feel threatened by meme lords? Do you feel like comedy production has now essentially become 1,000 teenagers in 1,000 bedrooms
This is
typing
my
crazy
message
shit?
to all meme lords. Come for me, and you better not miss. No, I think memes are great. Memes, because especially my generation, we've lived through so many horrific historic events. You know, like when I was in year 6, I woke up and 9/11 was on the TV. Before that was the like Kosovo conflict, climate change, the terrorism, and then also the rise of social media and how that has enabled the far right. Like that, it is so painful to be alive. And I don't know why I'm laughing, but memes are perfect for that, because they are just like tiny little crumbs of being, they're pointed, and they speak to a very dark truth sometimes, or an absolute absurd truth, but they're just perfect. They're little crumbs, they're little snacks of humor. And I think that's great. Like, I think there's a place for them at the comedy table.
Yeah. My only problem with memes is that they're often unattributed. The people often don't get the credit for creating. So I just feel when I see my least favorite thing is if like there's a really great meme and someone posts, you know, like a celebrity will post it and it'll get 60,000 retweets, and they'll just say, "Who made this?" Just like, well, we shouldn't be at this point. Whoever first shared it, please credit the person that you saw it from, and then keep doing it. Let's not get to a situation where there's all this sort of stuff that's just sort of floating out into space, and there's someone who slaved over some, you know, image, just fuming, going, "Gah, with me."
I should point out now that Mark had a viral video that went viral with CNN. With Donald Trump punching a sick man.
I got it. Yeah. Oh, the only thing there was that people thought that CNN had actually made it, but no. I think same with Jen. Like, just absolutely little crumbs that just little lifts through the day. And again, that's what's kind of great about TikTok. Just that short little boost of something, just a little hit of comedy is really valuable.
You don't feel redundant.
But absolutely. But that's, you know.
Yeah, I'm not worried about boat people coming to take our jobs. I'm worried about young people and their TikToks.
Yeah, exactly.
Take our jobs.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's
TikTok,
funny. Like,
TikTok comedians are so funny, and one of the things Jen was talking about TikTok before. One of the things which I love seeing on TikTok, a lot of Indigenous folks on TikTok being so fucking hysterical, and they don't have a space on mainstream media, and you see so many really funny Aboriginal kids just ripping it up on TikTok and being so funny and being very satirical, and it makes me nervous.
Yeah, it's the purest form of satire, because it's people who actually have stakes in what's happening speaking that. Like there's a bunch of like amazing trans comedians on TikTok who I'm following, and making jokes that like will not be on television for at least another 20 years. And I think that that's what's most interesting to me about comedy, is people who have actual stakes in what they're saying. That speaks more to me than you know, us being like, "Ugh, Trump's bad." Wow. Like, because I don't know. I'm just going to fade out and I'm blah, blah, blah.
I'm mindful also that we're hitting time as well. So I might use that as a point to do some wrap up. But before I do that, one thing I really like to do is just say there's so much to feel shit about that it's nice to kind of end with a few comments on something that you've been really, really happy about, that's made you really joyful this week. So I'll give you a few moments to think about that while I just do our wrap up. And part of that is to say thank you, all three of you, for coming. I think it's been a really interesting conversation. I'm really grateful for your different perspectives. And thank you to everyone who's come and joined us in the crowd as well. I think it's been a really interesting discussion, and I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any thoughts, whether good, bad, or otherwise, we will send around a feedback sheet to everyone who's attended today. If you can put any thoughts or comments you have in it, that would be awesome. We do read everything that you add and try and use it to refine the sessions that we hold. Also, next week, we've got a whole bunch of really interesting sessions planned, so please have a look and come along if you'd like. On Monday, we're going to be talking about poverty in Australia, so what it was like before COVID, what it might look like afterwards, and what we can do to kind of reduce it as much as possible. We've got our weekly Political Geek Fest with Catherine Murphy and Peter Lewis on Tuesday. The State of the Nation, so is the National Cabinet change the nation for good, bad, or otherwise, on Wednesday, which is going to have Mike Baird and Jay Weatherall, two really interesting state premiers who've played a really significant role in COAG over the last couple of years. So that'll be really interesting. And then on Thursday, a conversation about aged care in the era of COVID and you know, what's happening and what we can do to make sure that aged care is stronger and more capable. Because obviously, you know, this disease has disproportionately affected people in those kind of homes, you know, which already had a whole bunch of structural problems in the first place. So yeah, do check them out at australianhome.com.au. But to come back to our speakers, so Jen, your box is highlighted, so I'll start with you. What's made you joyful this week?
The finale of Schitt's Creek. And just Schitt's Creek in general. It's a wonderful, wholesome show that shows us that we can exist in a world that is full of virtue and happiness. And it ending it's just beautifully put together. And I cried, but it was happy crying, and I needed it, and I need that release, and I needed to believe in the world again. So highly recommend it.
Yeah, I similarly really enjoy watching Hollywood for the same reason on Netflix. It's so stupidly saccharine, but I'm here for it at the moment. Yeah. What about you, Dan?
Facebook bought Giphy this week, which is a big GIF website full of memes. And Dan Nolan on Twitter had the best tweet about it. He said, Facebook have seized the memes of production.
He is.
That was fantastic. And can I plug something, Dan, before we go? If you could subscribe to my podcast, Irrational Fear. I know that's backwards. Just go to irrationalfear.com and subscribe to my podcast. That'll be great. I get comedians on to talk about heavy things like this, but hopefully in a smart and funny way.
And Mark, what about you? What's made you joyful this week?
Well, I now have a hole in my life in the shape of the Chicago Bulls documentary, The Last Dance. Now that I've finished that, but that gave me a lot of joy. The most joyful thing I can recommend: Sophie Ellis Bextor's Kitchen Discos. She and her family. She has 5 boys. She does a weekly concert of some of her greatest hits and a bunch of other songs just from her kitchen. There's a live stream on Instagram that goes up on YouTube and everything. It is pure joy, and that's getting me through.
Wow, I'm going to spend my entire weekend watching that.
Yeah.
And on that note, thank you again, everyone, for coming, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Good to be
Thanks,
here.
friends.
Yeah.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.
Bye.